Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Frank Agin, author of Foundational Networking. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate you having me on.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Agin, hard G, but you were a little off. But you know what? I went through 3 years of law school, and they butchered my name at graduation. I can deal with it.
Well, I appreciate that, Frank. I always joke around saying to Steve Harvey, a podcaster, so we always end up butchering at least one or two names a week.
Yeah.
Just part of it, so I appreciate your understanding with that.
No problem.
Well, you ready to get started?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
They're writing their book now. What I would do, I guess the piece of advice I would give them if they're writing their book now is to earmark time every week. And that's what I did. I marked out, for me, every Monday morning. I'm self-employed, so I have that flexibility. But I would come into the office, I would turn everything off, and I would say, I'm giving this 4 or 5 hours of undivided attention. Now, I might think about writing throughout the week, and might tinker with outlines, but I would, during that time frame, I would dial in. Some people talk about, hey, an hour a day. I'm like, no, I'm going to pack 5 straight hours into this, and there's not as much stopping and starting, but just pick away at it. Pick away at it. Don't think you're going to get it done in a month. If you're going to be doing a decent-sized book, but just keep picking away at it.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
In this day and age, it's really easy to get published. My first book actually was a novel. I wrote a novel back in 1986 on a Mac Pro. And I would set the dot matrix printer to go, and I would have to leave because it would just drive me crazy, doing 10 pages at a time. And I had that manuscript for the better part of a decade, and then started realizing that there was people like you out there that could help me actually bring it to fruition. I had talked to people along the way. There were people along the way that offered to take my manuscript and get it into print. It was going to cost me $30,000, and I'd have to buy a garage load of books.
Yeah.
And so, digital publishing has really been a game changer. I think the hardest part for anybody to have a book is, one, just having the discipline to actually write it. And then I tell people, once you've written it, you're really kind of halfway home, because there are a lot of decisions that you don't really think about. How it's laid out, how the cover's going to look, all the inner workings of a book. Are you going to have quotes in it? Are you going to have reviews from people? And kind of sourcing all that stuff is another big chunk of it. The actual getting the book published, people like you make it easy, to be perfectly honest. Just sitting down and writing, it's the hard part.
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, just finding the right person. You kind of heard me groan when I said, when you were mentioning that, those people want to charge $30,000 and just, make you buy an entire garage full of books. That stuff's just wrong. And there's still companies out there that do it. That's always kind of been a pet peeve of mine, because as a hybrid publisher, the nice things, we focus on the digital, we help with the paperback. But the main thing is what we're doing is, one, we're not charging anywhere near $30,000. But the other thing with that is we're showing you exactly how to launch the book as a product launch versus just a book launch. We are tying in services So you are tying in back end offers, so you can make your money back as soon as possible. And
Yeah.
it just blows my mind to this day that there are people out there that charge 30, even $50,000. I know there's a guy in Dallas, this I don't want to say scam artist, but a scam artist who was basically telling people to, you can get your book done with us for $50,000 and take a second mortgage out in your home and blah blah blah. And I could have throttled
Yeah.
the guy because I heard about that from friends that went to it, and I'm going, one, those price points are ridiculous. Two, why in the world would someone tell you to take a mortgage on your house? I mean, that type of
Yeah.
stuff is just wrong. I mean, yes, to make money you have to spend money, absolutely. You don't need to be spending 30 to 50 grand on a book. No way.
No. No. Yeah. Like I say, services like yours. The only, the only excuse people have to not have a book, consultants, coaches, people who have something valuable to share. The only excuse they have is their own discipline. It's really what it boils down to. I didn't get my novel published for years just because there was no way I was gonna fork over $30,000 for a novel that it didn't have mass appeal. So I wasn't looking to. There was no way I would ever get my money back. So.
Yeah, and I tell you what, my first book, it took me 4 years to get that story out because I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I had this really bad health crisis in 2011. Basically, long story short, doctor told me if I didn't get my act together, I was going to be dead in 5 years. So that was a pretty big opener. Dropped a bunch of weight, kept the weight off, and I wanted to write this book to help people that struggle with weight, that had health issues, that had sleep apnea, some of the things that I was dealing with. But the idea was stuck in my head for 4 years because, Frank, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what were the next steps. And finally, I
Yeah.
just started to learn more and more about how publishing works and how indie publishing works. And 4 years later, I'm on this flight to Vegas and I just had this epiphany. I'm like, I've got friends out there that have now published books that have had a lot of success. There is no reason I can't share this story. So I had
Yeah.
the inspiration. Next morning, I'm at the Mirage Hotel and Casino, and I outlined the entire book out on my iPhone. A week later, I spent 3 days at home writing 20,000 plus words, became my manuscript. I then took the entire month of July, literally, I mean, I don't even know if it was 16 or 18 hours a day. It was just so much time. But I would spend half the day learning about book publishing and then the other half of the day learning about marketing because I knew that they were going to be just so critical. And essentially, what happened was, long story short, my book became a bestseller. I strung together a couple of additional bestsellers after that. And then I had people reaching out going, hey, can you help me? And that was when we started implementing all our systems and processes because we did develop a system. We had a system that worked. But the most important thing was then we could help people. And just that one little book, learning how to do it right, just for me, it was life changing. But the best part is now I have the privilege to help other people with their journey and to make sure that they're properly taken care of.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we do need to get the word out about people like you because I still run into individuals again who have written things, and there are some people out there they're holding out for the big time publishers, and I tell them good luck.
Yeah.
But there are people out there that think that the only thing they can do is the $30,000 get a mortgage on your house, and when you explain that there are actually people out there that will basically help you get it done, and it's very very reasonable. A lot of times I feel like I'm showing fire to a caveman, right? They're just like totally amazed. Like, oh, really? That's incredible. But it's really not. It's been around. It's just people don't realize it. They shop on Amazon. They do all sorts of things in the digital world, and don't realize that it's crossed over into publishing as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll tell people that are who are going out there and looking at different publishers, ask them one question, and that is, what are your core values? And if they can't answer that question within 5 seconds, find somebody else. Because if
Yeah.
you can't answer that question as a person or as a company within 5 seconds, something's wrong.
Right.
So I'm glad that you were able to get your books out. I believe we were talking before the show. You've published 10 books, I believe, and I know you've also been helping people to get inspiring them to get their stories out as well.
That's correct. Yeah. Foundational networking was kind of my. like I said, I wrote a novel, and the novel for me was just kind of I played small college football. It was just kind of a way for me to encapsulate my experiences and have some fun and share the stories with teammates and friends. But that really gave me the confidence that I could write a book. And when I started doing what I'm doing, helping small businesses get connected, I wanted to share not those experiences per se, but share what I was learning and share the pluses and the minuses. And so I really spent, like I said, I spent every Monday morning for probably a year and a half cranking out, page after page. And I estimated that I could do about a page an hour, just writing. And so at a year and a half, I had 300 some pages. Met with a friend of mine who doesn't sound like a friend, but he sat down and right away said, "You need to cut 160 pages out of this." And so I did. But it was a process. But once that first book was done, and you have that confidence, a lot of other things start rushing to your head. First of all, I had 160 pages that I didn't use that was great material, and that was the impetus for other stories. I had an individual come to me and say, "Hey, listen, I see you've written a book. I want to write a book too. I would love to co-author one with you." And that happened twice. And so when you're bringing somebody along co-authoring, that it's a blessing and it's a curse. It's a blessing because there's somebody there helping with half the work, but it's a curse because you've got to kind of make your voice and their voice work together. So I don't know that it's a tremendous time saving, but that led to a book, and then just one thing after another, and it was just like, okay, I have a story, I have a thought, I've got a compilation of ideas, I've got a system for putting a book together. I'm not going to leave these things in my head. I'm going to share them. So I just kept writing.
Well, let's talk about the marketing side now. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launches that has worked well.
People ask me all the time, people who have written books, what's the best way to get your book sold? And I can't speak for every book on this, but what foundational networking is, and pretty much all my books, they're books about professional networking and how to be successful in professional networking. But for those types of books, I find that the best way to sell the book is to give it away. Now, when I say give it away, because that always shocks people when I say that to them, when I say give it away, I don't mean actually give physical copies away. But what I mean is share little bits and pieces of it. Share a story on social media, in a newsletter that talks about a little bit of the book or talks about a concept in the book, and then say, well, this is an excerpt from such and such book. Paul, how many times have you read a magazine article and there's been a story? It's in Inc. magazine, it's in Success magazine, and it's not even a page. It's a half a page, 3 columns, half a page, and you read it, and it's one little excerpt from a book, and you say, oh my gosh, wow, is that interesting? I need to go get the book, right? You go buy the book. I got bookshelves full of books that's how I've gotten them. So I tell people the best way to market a bok is to give it away. Go and give a speech and don't tell them about the whole book, but tell them about pieces of the book. You don't have time to talk to you about a 200-page book, but in an hour's time, I can tell you about a tenth of it, and kind of intrigue them, and they'll want to go get one. Certainly, if you have them for sale in the back of the room, they'll want to get one. So I think for me, that's been the best way to market the book.
And with that, you mentioned that you were using different pieces. So were you also doing these articles and Inc. and some of these other publications?
Yeah, I mean, there would be stuff that would be on Facebook. It would be newsletters I would put out, just summarizing, here's a thought, an excerpt from the chapter. Occasionally, people would ask me to guest blog or to provide a piece in their newsletter that went out to a professional group or something like that. So there's lots of avenues to try and find those sorts of things, and that's part of the marketing. Just finding those audiences that you can share to. Certainly, getting out and talking about giving speeches. Giving presentations. I get lots of opportunities to go out and talk to people about professional networking, and I use stories a lot because stories sell, but I'll use stories from the book, and then I'll just kind of reflect back. This is all in foundational networking. So I don't really have to push it hard. I just have to intrigue people with what's in the book.
Well, and you also mentioned specifically about, you said one of the best ways to sell your book is through networking. So are you talking about in-person networking? Are you talking about internet networking, social media, or are you talking about everything?
Really all of it. Really all of it. Certainly, going out to face-to-face events, yes. I do a fair amount on LinkedIn. Interestingly enough, one of the books that I co-authored with an individual who connected with me on LinkedIn, and we certainly spoke on the phone and shared lots of emails, but we have never met. We've never met face-to-face. Feels like we did. Feels like we spent so much time together that we had, but we've never met face-to-face. So, yeah, all of that. And, my mind is that social media is really no different than meeting with people in person. It just provides you an opportunity to meet with people over a greater distance. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. You're near Dallas, Texas, right?
Arlington, yeah.
Arlington, yeah. We, 30 years ago, this isn't happening.
Yeah.
Right. But this happens, and our call is very routine. So the opportunity to be able to network with lots of people it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's just amazing the fact that we record this podcast, obviously in my office here in Arlington. But the amazing thing is, just an example of my 3 calls today. The first call was in Iceland.
Yep.
Our second call, which I'm just thinking top of my head, I think she was Florida. And then I'm talking to you in Columbus. And I've had other days where we've had calls in England, Australia, Canada. And the amazing thing, it's all through Skype. And it's all just through the power of the internet and the power of using a podcast mic and a preamp. And we can have conversations with anyone in the world. It really is amazing how far technology has come, because you're right, 20 years ago, this isn't happening.
Right.
And it really is an amazing thing just to see how that technology really can bring us together. So,
and we can use that technology to get ourselves networked. I'm talking to people. Talked to a guy in Finland. I did a podcast interview yesterday with a woman in Paris. It's just talk to somebody on LinkedIn who's in Japan. It's just amazing what social media, what the internet has done to the world.
Yeah, it definitely is a game changer, because if you had a show years ago, because I was actually interviewing a lady last week. She had her own radio show, and she was actually having to go to her office in San Diego every day, and now she can just do it at her house.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, the fun of technology. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Oh, you know what? I joke about this because I ask this question on my podcast all the time. And but when I ask people the question, I can tell, and I kind of prep people with questions. Hey, I might ask this, I might ask that, so they kind of know it's coming. But when I ask the question, if they struggle, I know they're not a reader.
Yep.
Right? And I say, okay, if you've read 2 books in your life, coming up with the favorite's not hard. If you've read 500, coming up with the favorite is hard. So my favorite book, I'll say 2, all right? My favorite book is Foundational Networking. The only reason I say that is if it's not my favorite, Paul, it's going to be nobody's favorite. So I have to say that. But beyond that, absolute favorite book, there's some really good ones some really good ones out there. Lewis Howes released a book last year or 2 years ago now, The School of Greatness. That was a really good book. John Maxwell has a ton of great books. Those are awesome reads. Oh, geez. There's a book out there. Man, there's so many. I'm looking at the bookshelf here, and I can't even choose.
It's funny. I'm doing the same thing. So in my office, I have multiple bookshelves in here, but what I do have is my main table. I've got a shelf under there, and it's just got all my favorite books. And one of them is Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I just remember back to what a great time I had reading that book. I mean, the ultimate immigrant story, and the fact that he was already a millionaire before he even got into acting, and the fact that he has had such success in real estate. It's just such a great story and inspiring and funny.
Yeah. Adam Grant's Give and Take. That's a really good book. If you haven't had an opportunity to read that, for your listeners, pick up Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. He talks. He does a lot. He brings in a lot of research, but he talks about really dividing the world, the population, into three sets of people. There are givers, there are takers, and there are matchers. And he talks about the research surrounding those different types of general people. Givers are the people who are just always looking to help other people. Matchers are people who are looking to help, but they want something in return. And the takers are the people who are always looking to get the upper hand.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was a fascinating read. Simon Sinek's Start With Why, or Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, were both very good reads as well. Really kind of talking about just the human aspect of what drives us is what I took away from those books. But again, there's so many good books, and I have a bookshelf at home. In my office, I got a bookshelf, but my bookshelf at home is full of ones that I still need to read, and sometimes it's depressing because I'm not keeping up. Read an article, go buy a book. It's like I've got 6 other ones to read first.
Don't feel bad. I have a stack of books right now. I have Customers for Life. I have The Stick and Point Solution. Giving Everything You Can Out of All You've Got. The Big Leap. Mind Over Medicine. So trust me, I have a stack of books that I will eventually read when given the time. But the nice thing is I keep them in front of me. When the inspiration hits, I'll get out there and get it done.
Yeah. Well, one that somebody put in front of me recently was, it was published back in the 80s, Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. Again, it was, I think he wrote it in the 80s. He's a professor emeritus at Arizona State now, and was at Stanford at the time, but fascinating book, just a fascinating book talking about psychology and why certain things work and why certain things don't. So we go on for days talking about books. It's amazing. When I was in college, I had a professor who just kind of hammered on us. You need to read, you need to read, you need to read. And I was like, Professor Gustus, I'm sick of reading. But I've gone back to campus. He's now retired, but I've gone back to campus, and I've just said, hey, you know what? That was great advice. There was probably 5 years there where I didn't, but then I got into it, and I just, 50 years ago, you could get a college education, you could get a job, and you could just kind of coast, right? Just based on your experience and seniority in a business. Anymore, you better be sharpening the saw every day. You better be reading. You better be getting smarter. You better be just trying to keep up. Because if you're not, life's going to pass you by.
I'm a huge believer that the continuous improvement model for both yourself and then for your business, and just staying on top of things. One thing I like too, you mentioned give and take, and I love how you talk about the 3 types: the givers, the takers, and the matchers. And I just wish people would realize, if you're a giver, everything else takes care of itself. I truly believe that. I give away all my content for free, all my books. The the one book in particular, our Get Published one, I give it to every guest. We're always giving that copy away. And there's two reasons. One, we want to share information. But the other thing is it's always going to come back in a great way, because people that do read your material, if they're inspired by it, and if they want help, they're going to reach out. And you have a conversation, see if you can, if it's a fit. If it's a fit, awesome. And if not, you just had a great conversation. And I'm telling you, that just by giving, it all comes back in a great way. And I'm a true believer in karma. What goes around comes around. You do well, you take care of people, it comes back in a beautiful way. However, if you don't, if you are a taker, then it's going to come back in a whole different direction. You're probably not going to like it very much.
Yeah. No, it's really kind of a fascinating thing to think about. There's so many concepts in that book. It's a great read.
Well, for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Oh, my favorite quote. I have lots of quotes that I have a journal where I keep them, but my all-time favorite quote is this: "You can't discover new oceans unless you have the courage to lose the sight of shore." And the reason that's my favorite quote is just some backstory on myself. I have a law degree. I have an MBA. I started my career in public accounting as a tax consultant, and it was a good place, good people, good job. It just wasn't for me. I'm an entrepreneur, and corporate life was not for me. But when you're in a job that's paying you really well, it's hard to leave. And I remember stumbling across that quote. It was on a poster. I bought a card that had it on, just one card, and I framed that one card, but I stared at that every day. I would come into work and just reminding myself as I was preparing to leave that, this is scary. This is scary, but I just have to have the courage to walk away from it. So that's why that's my favorite quote.
That reminds me of my last 2 years in teaching, because I kept going back and forward about whether to leave or not. And I decided to wait for one more year. I was going to leave. And then I had an opportunity. I was recruited really hard by this school in Fort Worth. One of my best friends was teaching at. And of course, he was recruiting me for the whole year. So kind of felt like a teacher version of LeBron for a moment. So I'm like, okay, one more year, I'll stick it in. But then I realized probably March into that year, I was like, okay, I'm not going to do another year after this. This is it. And they knew when they hired me. I'm like, hey, I'm probably just going to be doing this for a year because I'm a publisher. I have these other opportunities that we really do want to branch out. And it was scary. I mean, June 2017, you're out. I was out there without a net. I had money built up, so I had funds to make it through the best part of a year in case there were issues. We had a couple of struggles starting up, but then everything just started to click. It took time. Yeah. I mean, there's no such thing as an overnight success. It takes a whole lifetime to do that. But the main thing is the fact that we stayed the course, we made adjustments, and we've done record revenue now for months on end because we took that leap. And I think if we would still stayed in those respective jobs, we never would have had those opportunities to build and to grow our businesses, and most importantly, have the opportunity to help other people in their journey and for them to get their freedom with what they want to accomplish in life.
Yeah. I talk to a lot of people who've been put in transition, if you will, lost their jobs, and in time, because it's hard to find another job, especially if you're over 50. It's hard. The odds are stacked in your favor, but in time, they end up doing something on their own because they've got tremendous skill sets, tremendous work ethic, and they, without a doubt, will say the best thing that happened to me was getting let go. That was the best thing, because you get those golden handcuffs and you're just kind of hanging on. If somebody forces their hand, it's not courage at that point. It's life. You just got to deal with it. So.
Yeah, but the nice thing is, I always talk about two mantras with my clients. One, done is better than perfect, and the second one is don't be afraid to take the plunge. And that's the mantra that I kept using in my head. It's like, don't be afraid to take the plunge. Yes, is there risk? Yes, do I have a mortgage? But I'm like, you know what? Yeah, this is worth it. And I don't know about you, but I felt it was the best decision I ever made.
Oh yeah, I've been self-employed since '95, and when you're working for somebody, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. When you are working for somebody, you have one client. If they decide they're not going to keep you around, you've lost your one client. I have hundreds of clients, I get fired every day. I get hired every day too. It all works out, and I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and have lost everything. And it's just, you know, it's just a better way to be. But you have to take that. You have to take that plunge. You have to make that move.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I can tell you it's a life changer. For those who are listening to the show right now, if you're thinking about this, then go on my website, go to BCG Publishing, go to Brodie Consulting, or go to Frank's site that we'll plug in just a moment, and have that conversation and just go, hey, what did you do? Because I'm going to be happy to answer that question. Frank, I'm sure you're going to be happy to do it as well.
Yeah. Well, I've got a conversation tomorrow. I've got a younger brother of a college teammate that would like to talk to me, and I know what the conversation's going to be about. You know, he's just turning 50. You know, his career is kind of plateaued. What do I do? You know, I know what the conversation's going to be. So
I think you should write a book.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, Frank, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way for people to find me online, well, there's a couple best ways, I guess. LinkedIn, Frank, Frank Agin. I'm happy to connect with anybody. I'm happy to communicate with anybody. Another way of getting me is I have a business website, amspirit.com, AMSPIRIT.com. But if you go to frankagin.com, that's kind of a central hub. Shows all my books. It has my email address on there. You can link to my LinkedIn if you want to look at my LinkedIn profile. It has kind of a description of all the things I work on. So that's probably a great starting point, is to go to Frank Agin, FrankAgin.com, frankagin.com.
Well, Frank, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.